how this meeting's going to run. But first of all, let me welcome everybody to the meeting. I'm Andy MacLeod. I'm the Surrey County Council for Central Farnham and Waverley Town Council for Moor Park and Farnham, and I'm chairing tonight's meeting. This is the 5th Local Liaison Forum, and just to give a little bit of information on how the previous forums have gone, they've all been pretty well attended. The two general ones, which was the launch one and the one related to community issues, had 220 attendees in total. And the two more specific ones, one aimed at residents associations and the Farnham Society, and the second one at local businesses, had 52 attendees in total. And we were a bit unlucky with the business one because that actually happened the day after a lockdown was announced. And of course, the business people had to pay more attention to that issue than sadly attending the meeting. But Wyatt, who chaired that meeting, actually has made a commitment that we'll come back to the business issue sometime after Christmas. We've also had more than 800 responses to the public consultation that was sent to everybody in Farnham. Now, there's a certain number of lessons we feel to be learned from the previous consultation. Overall, there've been positive feedback on them all, and we're broadly happy with how they went. But there've been two items, I guess, of negative feedback I'd like to refer to. It was felt at the last meeting, the panel members dominated the meeting, the first half of the meeting, a bit too much. So we're going to ask panel members to be a bit more concise in the responses this time. Not that we're not asking them to speak at all. People want to hear from the panel members, but we don't want speeches from people. And the comment was made that even some members of the audience, if I may say so, were inclined to make little speeches as well. So we'll ask the audience members if they'd be good enough to make the point succinctly. And also, you don't need to say everything at one time. You know, you're very welcome to come back and make different points after your first time. And secondly, after you get a response from Chris's team or whoever's answered it, we'll give you an opportunity to come back and see what you think about it. The other point that I think is a bit of a concern, and this isn't a widespread thing that's said, but there's one or two people who've been saying that, in fact, that this thing is a little bit of I'll use the term charade, that the whole thing is predetermined. It's been decided what's going to happen at the end of it, and we're just going through an exercise for PR purposes. I have to say that just is not true, and that even that between the panel members and the board members, there isn't actually agreement about very much, other than we're all agreed that there's a real problem in Central Farnham, a real problem to do with the town deteriorating a little bit due to the traffic, excess traffic in the town, and it's no longer as nice a shopping experience and nice a resident experience as it was. That's the thing that we're all totally agreed on. What we're not agreed on is how to solve a problem. So, for example, some people think that we should be doing something dramatic and quickly in the next year or two, largely pedestrianising the town. Other people think that perhaps we need to take it a bit more step by step. And there's no decision about any of this. In fact, that's something that will emerge out of the consultation exercise and out of what the Chris's programme team is doing. So that's all I wanted to say in relation to that. The other thing I'll say is in relation to how participants can take part in the meeting. You can actually put questions and comments into the Q&A box, and you'll be answered perhaps by a member of the panel. But that's the less important way to do things, actually. The more important thing to do things is through the hands up facility, which we won't ask you to do that till after Chris has given the presentation. Chris and the team have given the presentation. And then Ian Lynch, who's the host for the meeting, will be able to bring people into the meeting and actually allow them to talk, allow them to ask questions, make points, and respond to the points that are made. That's the way it's going to work. The other thing I'd ask people to do is look for where the mute button is on your screen, because often people start talking, and everybody does this. I do it myself without forgetting to turn the microphone. So if you're going to ask a question, if you're going to make points, make sure you know where the mute button is. So that's all I want to say at the start. I'm going to now, if I can ask Ian to bring up the next couple of slides. That's just, this is really the saying who the people are in the panel. Apart from myself, who's the chair, if anything goes wrong with my technology, my joint chair, John Neal, will take over and run the meeting. And if that goes wrong, Wyatt Ramsdale, who's the deputy chair, will take over and run the meeting. You can see there who the programme team are as well. So if we can go on to the next slide, Ian. That's just the agenda. So if you go back to the agenda briefly, we've already done the welcoming introduction, and we're running a little bit late. We're now going to go to the views from the programme team, Chris and Paula. After that, I'll briefly tell you again how people can get involved in the meeting. Then there'll be 90 minutes of audience participation. And finally, John Neal will close the meeting with a 3-minute closing of how he feels it's gone. So if we can go to the next slide, Ian. And I'll now pass over to Chris and his team to take us through what they want to tell us about how the programme is going. Over to you now, Chris.
Thanks for that, Andy. And just staying on the objectives for today, I mean, we have had a number of LLFs, and you know, I'd be the first to acknowledge that Farnham has been studied to death over the last 20 odd years. But the key is that we need to know from yourselves about what you feel the issues are. We're going to put today some views of possibilities. These are views that have been sent to us, and it's to generate some discussion. But there is a disclaimer that the team have not got any preconceived ideas. We are working on that at the moment, and I'll come to that in a second. But it's about seeking your views. This has got to be a bottom-up approach and not a top-down approach. Thanks. Can I have the next slide, please? So can I just give you an overview, and this may help. We went out, and a number of you will be aware, Andy's already mentioned it, we had 800 responses with a statement, a programme statement, as to what we thought was the issues for Farnham, what we thought was the vision going forward, what were the key objectives. We outlined 4 projects there. The first project was Quick Wins, and I'll come on to some of those in a minute. The second project was the town centre, which we're talking about now. The third project was Hickley Corner and the A31. The fourth project was Recklesham and the A325. They are intertwined. You can't actually divorce them. So whilst we've got them as separate projects, that's for management purposes, they are intertwined. So we consulted on that. People agreed with what we'd said, that there was nothing untoward. The vast majority either strongly agreed or agreed. We took that back to the board at the last meeting, which was a couple of weeks ago, and the board endorsed that, and we're now moving forward. At the next meeting on the 20th, and this is the work that's being done now, and this is what these LLFs are feeding into, we're going to produce for the board an optimised infrastructure plan, basically a transportation plan. And this will have details from the previous studies. It will have the issues that have been raised, that you've raised here, or were raised, in fact, as part of the public consultation for the vision statement, and it will be a proposed way forward in terms of transport schemes. That will go to the board on the 22nd of January, and we will consult. Timing on that's very quick because we need to consult before we get to the May elections and the period that's termed PERDA, where local authorities can still do business, but they can't promote and that sort of thing. So we want to get that done before the next election and get your views about the type of schemes that are possible and what we're thinking about. And then that will go back to the board again in May. And then from that, we will get schemes being worked up. So there will be plenty more consultation, but this is more about just seeking views and issues. And I know a number of people have been on these meetings and are saying, well, we want some ideas. Well, we're going to give you some ideas in a second now to try and foment some discussion. But they are ideas, and they are ideas that have come from people within Farnham and groups within Farnham. So there is a disclaimer there. These are not ideas that are being promoted by ourselves at the moment, but just to give you an idea of what the art of the possible may be. Next slide, please. So, as we say, the development of the OIP is built upon the previous consultancy studies. And, you know, to give you a flavour of that, there was a study done by Steer Davis Gleave in 1994. TRL did a study in 2005. Scott Wilson did a study in 2008. Ricardo AE did a study in 2013. Mott MacDonald did one in 2016. And more recently, there was some work done on some master planning that was done in 2019. Farnham has been studied to death. The issue is, though, what was looked at even 4 years ago has now been subsumed into new policy. Not subsumed, but it's been overtaken by new policies. So since then, there's been a lot around climate change. There's been new documentation, new policies that have come out from Waverley in terms of the local plan, your own neighbourhood plan. So all of what's been done previously has got to be updated. It's not to say we throw it out of the window and start again, but we need to update it. We need your views, the community and elected members' views about the future of Farnham. Bear in mind, this is all about just generating the OIP. What will come out of that is a load of schemes, a load of proposals, and they will be consulted on. So none of this will result in something at this stage, certainly, set in tablets of stone. But we do know the urgency. So it's about haste, it's not about speed, and that's why we're moving this through as quickly as we can. Then, as I say, we've got the local, the borough and government policy. So what have we found out so far? This has come from the programme team. Farnham is a high car dependency town. Now, people may think, well, we've got an ageing population. You have, but it's not that significantly different from the ageing population across the southeast. But in terms of car usage, you use the car far more than nationally and within the southeast. And it is resulting in limited walking and cycling and low bus patronage. We're not saying the car's bad, we're just saying that's a fact. You use the car a lot, and we know there's a lot of car parking spaces within the town centre. Through traffic. People say the issue is through traffic. Actually, it's people living in Farnham in the main, particularly north to south, that's crossing the town. Yes, there's an element of through traffic, and we will have that. We've been asked the question about origin and destination surveys. We have got those, but they're a bit out of date. Unfortunately, with COVID, there's to get surveys done now and not always going to give us a precise answer because the amount of traffic flows have obviously been affected by COVID. Deliveries into the town centre, massive increase, not necessarily with HGVs. HGVs have stayed the same. What's reduced is the volume of traffic. What's increased is the volume of small vans, white van man, Amazon deliveries, things like that. Now that we've already addressed, or we're looking to address. We carried out the HGV study. We are looking to put a restriction on traffic coming from the M3 through to town and beyond, and likewise going the opposite direction. So we are looking to address that. That is something we've already commissioned and we're working that through. We're also going to look at the better ways of doing deliveries, working with businesses and so on. So deliveries are an issue. Obviously, the road network is inappropriate. 1960s ideas imposed on a 15th century town. Someone said to us, we've got roads here that were the horse and cart, and now, of course, we've got cars and HGVs, 40-odd tonners coming through what were roads that were built effectively for horse and carts. So yes, it is an inappropriate road network. Classification, that is an issue because the classification in sat-navs sends people through the town centre. So that is something we are looking at because you know, the A325 actually runs through the town centre, as does the A287. So it is something we are looking at. However, that's something that's got to be done with the Department for Transport, and that does take time. That's not within Surrey's gift just to change like that. There's work to do on that, and that is not something that will be changed, I'd suggest, within 6, 9 or even 12 months. It is a long process, is that, to declassify a road. And there's other ways of dealing with it. There are interdependency issues. If we restrict HGVs in the town centre, where do they end up if they're coming down the 287? Up a hill. We have got a site that we think we can deal with that. We have got proposals about talking to Highways England about the M3 and Hampshire as well. So that's all part of the HGV work that we're doing at the moment. The bigger picture, we are looking to improve the quality of place in the town centre, but doing that will affect people using the town centre. This is everybody's problem. It's not just somebody else. We're all part of this issue. And that's, you know, in terms of, it's not a nice thing to do. This is about our success. That's what success will look like to us, improving the quality of place. Reducing road space for cars. This is not anti-car, but there's got to be a recognition. If you have 2,400 car parking spaces, that does include the station car park, but we've got a plan in a minute, shows the number of car parks in the centre of town. Do we wonder why we have an issue with air quality and cars? It's not all down to HGVs by any stretch of the imagination. It's to do with the number of cars. We need, though, to maintain the economic vitality of the town. And we've got to reduce those carbon emissions across not just Surrey, but obviously within the town centre. And electric cars are an answer to that, but don't go away with the illusion that just converting to electric cars is going to remove the pollution problem. Particulates are an issue of tyre wear, brake wear, and so on. So, you know, still having the same number of cars on the road, you get rid of carbon emissions, but you won't necessarily get rid of other issues that affect our lives. Thank you. Okay. So reduce carbon emissions, that's what we're looking to do. We're improving the quality of place, we're supporting the local economy, but we're making sure everything stays well connected. So what are the emerging components? As you probably expect. And it is a bit of a hierarchy, is this. New walking routes, pedestrianisation, reducing barriers to the movement of people, new cycling routes, planned places for people just to stand and look at the place. If you stand, dare you to stand on the borough too often, we get totaled half the time, and people do, as it stood before, with getting hit by wing mirrors and so on the footways. Major improvements to bus service. It's all right for me to talk about not having the car and so on, but we need alternatives. Park and stride, maybe park and ride. New car parks a bit further out so it doesn't bring the cars into the centre, but still providing that facility for people to be able to move. I'm not expecting people, you wouldn't. This is your town, your issues that we're trying to help resolve. We're not expecting people to lump carrier bags all over the place. No, but one change in a journey over a 5-day period could make a 20%. If you only go out once a day, could make 20% difference. Major changes to traffic circulation. You know, could be two-way on South Street. Changes in how we access the car park. So it's all those sort of things. And this is what will come out in the OIP. Thank you. So, something you'll recognise. Nothing untoward there. We've got obviously the new Brightwells development, and then we've got the rest of Farnham there. So what you recognise, that's the sort of area we're looking at when we talk about the town centre. We are obviously looking at Hinckley Corner, we are obviously looking at Recklesham, we're looking at Folly Hill, we're looking at Upper Hale, but this is what we class as looking at the town centre. Thank you. So, can I put that disclaimer again? These are not coming out of the programme office whatsoever. These are not coming out of the OIP. You think I'm probably labouring that. The number of times I've been in meetings and put something on the table and say, well, what do you think about this? Before you know where you are, oh, this is what you're proposing. You've a set agenda. This is what you're going to build. This is not. This is people within your community have taken the time and trouble to say, well, what could it look like? And that's an example at the bottom of Downing Street. Now on the next slide, please. Example at the top. What's that example showing? It's not one I particularly like because it's still car dominated, or bus and car and so on. But it's showing actually the borough being a two-way flow. So instead of pushing all the traffic down through the narrow bit of the borough onto South Street, you actually allow the traffic to flow the other way. Can I have the next one, please? Okay. What a pedestrianisation could look like. You know, again, it's not being produced by us. It's being produced by people within Farnham, businesses in Farnham, as to what you could get. Looks fantastic. Just as an aside, the programme on about Poundland, Belper in Derbyshire, its main high street is pedestrianised. 20,000 people. It's pedestrianised. Seriously. And we have Farnham, as we've currently got Farnham. It could be so much better, but still provide the functionality, still have that economic vibrancy to it. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is an interesting one. Again, that caveat, nothing we're promoting necessarily, but people have talked about it. A new link road, maybe from the top of Castle Street down into the Northern car parks. Is that a feasible thing? These are all the sort of things that are being passed back to us and all the sort of things that are under consideration. Nothing's off the table, but at this moment in time, until the OIP comes out, neither is anything on the table. And next slide, please. Okay, and yet another one. You know, this is about reversing flows. Again, all from people within the town who are residents of Farnham, who are passionate about something's got to be done. The green, pedestrianisations, the red are the live roads still. So again, these are all what we've got through, which is great. They're only an example, by the way. I could wax lyrical all night, but that's not the purpose. The purpose is to listen and hear from you. So these are only an example of the sort of things we've got. And then yet another one, pedestrianisation, semi-pedestrianisation. This is about pedestrianisation sort of is the emotive issue. All that means taking the cars out. No, actually, it means giving the town back to people. Cars are inanimate objects. They serve us for a purpose. They're not about making a town vibrant and looking good necessarily. You need to facilitate it in some other way. Can I have the next slide, please? And then not to forget, you know, is this something we should be looking at fairly quickly? A hopper bus. Now, all right, I've heard comments, well, people won't use it. I'd like to think if you give them the opportunity, people might use them. We're used to what we're used to. We're not, as human beings, we might think we change. We're not people who change well. The only time we really change and change quickly is when we're forced to change. COVID, classic example of that. Would we realistically have gone around wearing masks without COVID? We were forced to do that. Okay, next slide, please. And then finally, this is just one, a minor one. This is the Active Travel 2 bid. And I just touch on this because I touch on Brightwells as well at the same time because it's in the same area. We made a bid to central government. Our notional amount of money was about 8 million. But we bid, might be 7, sorry, I forget the figures fully. We bid £1 million over our indicative. We only got our indicative. We just slight of our indicative total. Farnham's one of 10 schemes. So this is the scheme that's in there. The key is, in government's inimitable way, they initially said we had to make a bid for these 10 schemes or this £7-8 million worth of money. Last year, September, the bids had to be in by. They were going to tell us what the bids, whether we were going to get the bids, and then we had to build it by March. They suddenly realised that that left no time for consultation, discussion or anything. Anyway, government have now accepted that, which is great. They've given us this money. We are now working all 10 schemes up. We haven't enough money to do them all. We're working all 10 schemes up. We will be consulting on them. The intention is we'll be going back to DFT with our proposals back in April, at end of March, April next year. So plenty of time to consult on them. But this was the scheme on East Street from Woolmead, right round the leisure centre. Not ideal. And I know with discussions with the Cycling Forum, they'd rather it go through the new development, which is great. The new development won't be ready. Well, it wasn't going to be anyway within the timescale we originally set. So we've got to work this one through again, but there will be further consultation. I know that caused some concerns. Brightwells, we're in discussion with Brightwells because they've got a lot of what we call 278 agreements. That's obligations they've got to do on the highway, build on the highway as part of their planning approval. Doesn't make sense at this stage to do all of that when we're looking at the whole of the town centre. So we're in discussions with them to actually minimise the amount of their work. Have to say, not let them off having to do what they do. We'll have the cash instead, thank you very much. And that will then be reinvested in the general area, the general vicinity of Brightwell. So there's discussions ongoing there. So I think that takes me to the end of my bit, and I'm sorry, I tried to rush through that, but the whole idea is let's have some discussion, let's have some debate. That's what we want to hear from you. As you can see, we're already getting a number of thoughts and proposals through, but this is really the last chance now to shape the optimised infrastructure plan. It's not the last chance to have the say. There will be plenty of opportunity of that in 2021, in March and in February and March. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks a lot, Chris. That's a very good presentation. Thank you. We're now going into the discussion session. I'll just remind people there's two ways you can take part. You can put questions into the Q&A box. Some people are already doing that. Or you can put your hands up, and some people are already doing that as well. And the better way is actually to put your hands up, actually, because then everybody will hear the question and everybody will hear the answer. So let's start with the three. We've now got four. The four people have got hands up, starting with Andrew Lawton. So if Ian can bring Andrew into the discussion. I can't see if that's happened yet, Ian. Ah, there we are. There's Andrew. If Andrew could unmute his mic now and ask his question. Over to you, Andrew.
Hi, good evening. I didn't actually have a question to ask.
Yeah, please go ahead.
No, I don't have a question to ask.
Oh, you want to make a point?
No, I didn't put my hand up to ask anything.
Okay, it was shown on the participant thing. You must have accidentally done something. Don't worry about that, Andrew.
Apologies, I'm just listening.
No problem at all. The next one is David Wild. If we can bring David in, and if we could bring Paul Hoskins in as well, Ian, so he will be after David. Okay, David, if you could you appeared and then disappeared again.
You're on mute, David.
That stupid thing. Right. Shall I go ahead?
Oh, we've even got a picture of you, David. That's really good.
Hello. Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, David. Please do.
How soon will HGVs be banned from the centre of Farnham? And given the state of retail nationally, what contingency plans are being made for Brightwells when the lack of uptake of its retail options becomes apparent? And are cycle lanes perhaps leading to the station to become part of the Brightwells picture? End of questions.
I think Chris is the best one to take this initially, and then one or two other panel members may want to comment.
Yeah,
Chris.
okay, no, that's fine. In terms of when will the HGV restrictions be put in? Well, there's two issues here. The first issue is the through HGVs, and we're working on that now. I'm hoping, and I'm still negotiating on timescales, that we will be able to have an order for that. It's going to be realistically about May of next year to have the order. Then it's got to be implemented. The problem we've got, we have a site, we know where we need to put the restriction. The issue is, and that's on the A287 up by the SO garage. The issue we've got is there's nowhere for HGVs to go once they hit that. So we've got to sign it off the M3, and we've got to get Highways England agreement. So I'm not master of my own destiny, and it is those movements that are causing the problem. The second part of that is that actually when you take those out, you've taken some of the HGVs out, but a larger proportion of HGVs are actually delivering to businesses. And obviously we've got to allow that, that's got to carry on. However, we can deal with it in different ways. One of the things we can look at is looking at bits of the car parks that we can possibly make use of to allow for HGVs to park there rather than on the highway. The other thing that we're looking at is, could we justify a freight consolidation centre? So basically, a small warehouse on the outskirts of Farnham, all your major freight comes in, and then that's distributed via electric vans, even cargo bikes, electric cargo bikes. I mean, a number of towns are now looking at that, but that's got to be worked through with business and with the major distributors. But that sort of thing is coming in place now. But unfortunately, a number of these things are regulatory, and we've got to go through a process. We can't just put a ban, because we couldn't just put a ban on cars. We have to go through a process. So it's not something I can just do, as much as I'd love to do it overnight. Realistically, for the order, May of next year, and then we've got to get the signage up. But I'm looking at next year.
Okay. There's other questions, David, about Brightwells. Can you just repeat your question, David? Your camera's got. I can't see David now. Can you hear me, David?
Yes.
Would you just like to repeat what you wanted to ask about Brightwells?
Given the state of retail nationally, what contingency plans are being made for Brightwells when the lack of uptake of its retail options becomes apparent, and are cycle lanes perhaps leading to the station now to become part of the Brightwells picture?
Okay, if Chris can take the one about the cycle lanes, I'll say something about Brightwells. Right.
Yeah, so within the Brightwell development, it's not, oh God, I forget the name of the road that comes off. It's not the access that would come down off East Street that has this facility, but the access from Dog Flood working through onto South Street does have a cycle order on it. So when it's built, cyclists will be able to use that element of Brightwells. The reason it's not on all the public access is because of the narrowness of some of the pedestrian links coming down, particularly from East Street. That isn't to say it isn't on our radar and it isn't something we are looking at. We have had that discussion as to what the art of the possible is. I'm a cyclist myself. I know cyclists, when it comes to the crunch, cyclists will use whatever they will use, and that sometimes causes a problem with pedestrians and with car users. But certainly there is provision on the main thoroughfare, primarily going east-west within Brightwells for cycle use. There will be a cycle order on it.
Thanks, Chris. In terms of Brightwells, I happen to be the portfolio holder for Brightwells at Waverley. So the thing I'll say about that is that the contractual arrangements between Surrey and Crest Nicholson, is that Crest Nicholson have got the obligation to let out the shops, as well as obviously sell and let out the residential stuff. Now, there's no denying that it's a matter of concern that the scheme is due to open next year, and there's still not a vast number of the shops open, let out. But Crest are still expressing a great deal of confidence that they'll be able to do it. But there'll be a very crucial meeting in next January of what's called the Brightwells Board, at which they will be telling us, you know, where they are then. And we'll have to start thinking of possibly, I perhaps even shouldn't be saying this, we'll have to start thinking about alternative things if we get closer and closer and the shops aren't let. That's just a reality. But at the moment, Crest are still expressing total confidence that they'll be able to let out the shops, and that is the actual contractual position. I'm sure that isn't the most satisfactory answer I can give you, David. But as a council, as Waverley and as Surrey, we are committed to making sure that this project becomes a success. It's there, it's being built, and we will make it a success somewhere or other, either in terms of the original arrangements or something else will be done. I don't know if that's satisfactory, David. You're welcome to come back if you wish to comment further.
When's the meeting in January?
It's later on in January, towards the end of January.
Right. Well, no, that's perfectly okay. It's not a lot more than I expected. What makes Crest confident?
I have to say, David, I don't want to turn this meeting into a meeting about Brightwells and how we can fill Brightwells. It takes away from the main purpose of this meeting. You might think I'm deflecting, but I'm quite happy to talk to you about that offline, David. I'd be very happy to do that.
Right.
Okay, the next questioner is Paul Hoskins, and if Ian could turn on Diane Jeffrey, who's the one after, so that she's ready after Paul's said his thing. If you could now ask your question, Paul. I don't know if you've got a camera you want to show your face, but you're welcome to do it either way.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Yeah, good. The camera doesn't work, unfortunately.
That's no problem.
Okay, thank you for letting me the opportunity to speak. This is important. So if you just indulge me for a couple of minutes, please, as lots of people talk for a long time, I'll just be as quick as I can.
Yeah, no problem.
I don't think anyone will be against the aspiration of making Farnham a better place to live. I mean, the situation in the town currently is dire. So such ambitions have got to be applauded. And I think having these meetings and the public engagement can only be commended. So I thank you for doing that. But I think any approach to improvement must be tempered by reality. And I'm going to use that word reality a lot. There is nothing wrong with having challenging goals, but they can't be impossible goals, which is why projects of all types often fall to the wayside. And the aspiration here in plain English is to reduce or eradicate car use and thus reduce pollution. If I just go on to the quick wins, the HGV on your own admission, that actually isn't that much traffic, around 2%, I think you said before. Allowing access for deliveries means that this can't be eradicated fully anyway. I don't actually have an issue with banning HGVs. I just think the reality is no one's going to really notice any difference. For 20 miles an hour, I would invite any non-local councillors to visit Farnham during the day to see what effect that would have. Traffic doesn't really move much. So again, I have no issue with it. I don't have any feelings on it. I just don't think, again, in reality, it's not going to make any difference to anything. We just come to the main point, which is a reduction in car use. Now, I just want to use a couple of examples that the council has a contradictory view on itself. Just a couple of examples. Last night, the Western Planning Committee refused permission for a building as it had no parking. The developer's mitigation that the proposed dwelling had a bus stop outside and thus automatic sustainability was almost literally laughed at. The same conclusion was reached with the Wilmby development. When the developer wanted to reduce car parking, it was refused. In these two examples, the committees, in my opinion, acted on the reality of the situation, which was correct. On the other hand, the council currently is doing all it can to ignore the reality that is current in the town. These are variously described as COVID active travel, temporary, permanent measures, to the point I'm sure some councillors would be excused for not really knowing themselves. Council and residents want to reduce congestion and thus pollution. The actual reality is the measures imposed as pavement widening only increase congestion and pollution, as some authorities have started to realise they cause more harm than any perceived good in infection reduction. 2 lanes into one does not go. How that helps anyone is frankly beyond me. Now, I do have a thought that maybe for the members of the public listening, these measures, the lane blocking was done or imposed without any consultation because of the COVID situation. I have a theory that if you took them away, putting them back again would involve an awful lot more work and an awful lot of effort for you, which is why I think really they're still there. But you can prove me wrong somehow. I'd also like to say, contrary to a statement in a previous meeting, traffic can't disappear if you force it to go elsewhere. I think you need David Copperfield to do that. Given that it is said most traffic is through traffic, then blocking the town means that traffic is still transient. It will just go somewhere else. Is that the solution to the population of the outlying areas? No, they're going to get all that traffic. It's still going to be there. I don't often agree with Councillor Paul Follows, but he is spot on with his comments in a previous meeting. Be honest with residents. Tell them, if you want this, then this is what will happen. Consequences must be spelled out. And surveys that have questions such as, and I'm going to exaggerate a bit for effect, do you want a healthy and safe life or do you want to die, would assume an obvious answer. That answer is then used as justification for an action such as lane blocking or banning cars. But that wasn't an honest question, was it? The solutions, there isn't one without major expenditure or a miracle performed by us whereby we uninvent the car, but things can be done to make it better while other actions are taken. I know in the current climate trend, this is the equivalent of me suggesting you drown puppies, but you must try to get the traffic you are currently stuck with moving. Maybe then the 20 mile an hour would at least be a realistic win to shout about. Practically, it means getting rid of the lane blocks. They're reassigning the lights outside Sainsbury's that currently act as a pedestrian crossing and control the central car park traffic exiting Victoria Road. They need to go back to pedestrian crossing only as they used to be. That allows more traffic, free movement to get out of the town. See, I told you I was driving puppies. This is realistic. I'm not trendy, I understand that, but I do guarantee you it would help.
Okay, Paul. Sorry, carry on, Paul. Just finish off. Okay, I was very happy to let you speak at some length, Paul, because you do represent a particular view, you know. And
I'd just like to finish, please, if I could.
Of course you can, as long as you don't go on for too long.
No, I'm nearly done.
Okay, go on.
I'll go back to what I was saying where you started talking. Remember, some of you are elected. Most of you will support a maximum allowed rise in council tax next year. I imagine you don't want to have to try and justify high tax and closing of, for example, facilities for children with special needs, or spending money on drilling holes in brand new road surfaces and generally making life miserable in the town, or more miserable than it was anyway. I'd just like to finish with one question and one final point. My point is, I would actually really quite like the town centre to be pedestrianised. Be honest about what it means in reality. Inform the electorate of what the consequences are. And my question is this: as councillors and the project leader are obviously in favour of the new age of active travel, could they please confirm to the electorate individually via the Farnham Herald or any other means that they will sell their cars and only use walking and cycling in future? Lead by example, practice what you preach. Thank you.
Is that it, Paul? Okay, I guess you should have the first shot at answering Paul's questions or points, Chris.
No, thank you for that. Paul, so let's go to the last point first. And you know, you've made that thing, sell your car. We're not suggesting that. When have we ever suggested that? What we're suggesting is just do it in a slightly different way. And these are the emotive issues. And of course, as you give the example to the questionnaire, yes, of course you can put emotive issues. The first thing I said when we started this was, it's not about me because I don't live in Farnham, but it's about people who live in Farnham. They are part of the issue there. And yes, we will be totally honest with people about what it means. If we move a car park out of the centre, if that is one of the proposals, then we'll be very clear about what that means. Interestingly, what you say actually does happen. When you remove road space, people do actually do different things, and that's been nationally found. That's not me saying it. That's not the Farnham Infrastructure Programme saying it. People do find other ways of doing things, amazingly. It's the same principle in reverse, that when you build a new road, it's like bees round a honeypot. You suddenly find a load of cars on it. Now, I know we designed them for that, but all of a sudden you get even more than you expected. And it's just that same principle in reverse. People do change their thoughts and views. The 20 mile per hour, you have your views, but these were the sorts of things that came up when we talked to people. So we can't rubbish them. We can't say it doesn't happen. We are actively looking to see what the speeds are. And then we will tell people, actually, on West Street, the speed is such. On Castle Street, and I think Castle Street is probably an issue, the speed is such. So those are the things we will come back with. We will come back with the facts. It will not all be about theory. But yeah, we'll be very clear with people what pedestrianisation means. But if we seriously don't do anything, nothing's going to change. And is that what we are suggesting? There are ways of around it.
Come in here, Chris.
We can go forward with it.
Chris, could I just interrupt here before you carry on?
Yeah.
I just in that same question, I'm not planning to sell my car anytime soon, questioner, but it's all about balance. You know, we want to discourage people to use their cars or lessen the use of their cars. We're not trying to stop people, you know, finding a way to come to town in a car or a bus or a bike or a walk, because I do all of those things. So it's all about balance. Yeah. Carry on, please.
Yeah. Let's get Paul. Let Paul in, because he was referenced and he wants to say something.
Sorry, so thank you, Andy, for letting me come back on that. And yeah. I do think that the point Paul repeated there is important, that we do have to be honest when we're talking about the consequences of these schemes, because we can't just sit here and say, do you want active transport? Do you want to ban HGVs? Because it's actually, do you want to ban HGVs in full knowledge of the knock-on effects of that? Obviously, I'm not a Farnham councillor, so I'm a Godalming councillor, and in Godalming we have pedestrianised a large portion of the town over COVID, and what it's done is it's forced people to look at alternatives to using their cars, and so I do think that sometimes you do have to take that leap a little bit in order to get people to think about the alternatives and to look at what to do with them. And actually, what you do have to do is make sure that there are good public transport links, which Farnham is lucky to have. So same with Godalming, and you do have to have good access to them. And I can't help but say this, Paul, I have to finish on this. I don't own a car. I cycle and walk everywhere and use public transport. So I'm hopefully not doing this as saying that people should change as a massive hypocrite. Okay.
Thanks for that, Paul. So if I can just add a couple of points, Paul, in speaking to Paul, who asked the question. I think the thing about the road system in Farnham, it is highly inefficient, in my opinion. You know, there's lots of journeys people are having to make, and almost every journey finishes up going through the narrow part of the borough or the narrow part of Downing Street, and that's because of the way the roads are configured. If you come down Castle Street and you want to go to Waitrose, for example, or Elphick's or the Lion and Lamb, you have to go all the way through the borough, down South Street, along Union Road, up Downing Street. And there's lots of journeys like that where people are having to go into these roads unnecessarily. And I think a more efficient use of the town centre roads would solve some of the problems. So that's my own view. And it's not just my view, it's the view of other people who have knowledge in this subject. Yeah. So if we can move now to Diana Jeffrey, if Diana would like to ask a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Diana.
Oh, you can. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I just didn't think I could I can't see myself at all. So I'm sorry. I wasn't aware of that.
If you have a camera, you can turn it on, Diana.
Pardon?
If you have a video camera.
I do have a camera, but nothing's coming up. I'm afraid I'm not a techie person. I'm not going to take your time much, but I understand that the County Council owns Coxbridge Farm and the land there. And I think, why isn't there immediately a park and ride built there. If we own the land, why don't we go ahead? Why do we have to take our ages to make a decision and do it? Let's do it. I mean, if we wait for electric cars and all the rest of it, it'll be 10 years before anything's done. We can't carry on indefinitely having consultations. Somebody has to take the lead and make decisions. And if Farnham people don't get together now and make the decisions, it'll be impossible. And I happen to know personally that the people in West Street are up to their necks with, they've had enough of the traffic and they will do anything to get rid of that traffic.
Well, thank you for that, Diana. You're absolutely right, or you're largely right, that Surrey owns most of the land at Cotswood Farm, but not all of it, by the way. Some of it is owned by the farmer himself. But Surrey obviously have a big interest in what happens at Cotswood Farm. And you've made that point, and Chris and the team have heard it. So we will take that point on board. I'm not saying we can do that, but it's a very interesting point you made, Diana.
Well,
we are aware of that.
I just wanted to say, why build houses there? We have enough houses. We have enough traffic. We have enough houses built. We've had 2 huge housing estates built just in Farnham. Why have another?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with you about that. But in fact, we are given a housing target, Diana, by the government, and we've got no choice about it. We've got to build a certain number of houses. It's not within our control, that, I'm afraid. That's a whole other subject, but we are forced to build houses sometimes where we don't really want to. Who's the next questioner now? Let me just click on my attendee. It's Christopher Butler is the next questioner. So over to you, Christopher.
Thank you. Due to the fact there's a colossal amount of development all around Farnham of new houses, and I'm particularly concerned about the Folly Hill development, where there's been so many HGVs coming down Castle Street, loaded up with dirt, going to the A31, tipping in that tip down there, then coming back probably with topsoil or something like that with another load. So Castle Street has been the through route for that development all the time. I had a feeling that there was a condition in the planning application that perhaps it shouldn't have come that way. It should have gone through the north direction, but I may not be correct about that.
Yeah.
But because there is so much more development in this, particularly in this area, I'm sure it's time we should be looking at a western bypass. I know it's been talked about for 40 years, but there should be some more funding. And I don't know where it comes from, but I've got a good idea where some of it could come from, so that we can have a western bypass, because until we've got that, we are never going to cure the traffic problem through the centre of Farnham.
Well, thanks for that point, Christopher. I'll ask Stephen to come in. Stephen, my colleague, is the County Council for North Farnham, and he knows all about the Folly Hill development and so on. So Stephen might want to say something about that, and then Chris can comment on the western bypass. So if you could come in first of all, Stephen.
Yeah, well, that development, of course, was opposed by the local elected planning authorities, and it was approved on appeal by a non-elected government inspector, which goes to the point that Andy makes. A lot of these housing developments are imposed on us from outside, and we don't have any say in it. And the HGV traffic down Folly Hill and Upper Hale Road are 2 of the areas where we're hoping we'll be able to ban those trucks into the future, because they should not be coming other than for legitimate access down those roads. The residents and the residents associations have put up a great fight to try and make sure that the development has as much resident friendly facets on the highway, such as a crossing that's going in, the bus stops being repositioned where the residents want them. And that's what you have to do now for things. You got to fight to get what you want, because you'll get other stuff imposed from outside. I could talk at greater length on some of these matters, but I won't, because obviously it's from you we want to hear. But this process of having all this input is how we can get to something that there's as much consensus on as possible, because what we've been trying to do now has been looked at for 50 years and nothing has been done for 50 years because we've never managed to get to a position of having a consensus on how to move forward. And that's what we're trying to achieve this time.
Thanks for that, Stephen. Chris, would you like to comment on the issue about the Western Bypass?
Yeah, we haven't got a project called Western Bypass, but in all the projects, it's there. It hasn't been forgotten about. As I said earlier, nothing's off the table, everything's on the table. The realism is, we were asked a question earlier about funding, and the bulk of the funding's got to come from central government. Surrey in itself, Waverley, Farnham Town Council cannot afford schemes of the size, and I'm not saying it will be the case that the proposal that we had for Hickleys goes forward, because that was a 2004 proposal. Things have changed. It will change, I am certain about that. Well, that was £100 million. We can't afford that. Government would have to look to fund it, and that is what government do. But we've got to meet their criteria. And the Western Bypass, when it was looked at quite a few years ago, didn't even meet the criteria then when we were into road building. We're not into road building now. But it's not off our agenda, and there are other ways and other means, and all of these things will be looked at. So, rest assured, it is there, it is within our mind. If there is anything we can do by whatever means, and that meets all the objectives, that is what we will look to do.
Thanks, Chris. The next questioner is Emma Bandy. So, Emma, if you'd like to put your question or make your point.
Hello, everyone can hear me okay? Hello.
We can hear you.
Wonderful. I've got a vested interest. I live in the centre of town. We all have a vested interest, but I live in the centre of town with my young family. And I just wanted to just say, please don't forget about the large number of children who go to schools in and through the centre of town. I was disappointed when the cycle bid didn't include routes to the likes of St Andrews and Pottersgate School, because we all know that actually children love to cycle, but our roads, a lot of us are very nervous about allowing kids on our central Farnham roads. Nudges and incentives are needed, and I know other people have put some suggestions in the Q&A here. The idea of the equivalent of a Boris bike scheme and bike shelters to make it practical to cycle in and park up. But also we need the roads to feel safer. And I think evidence shows, I'm not that au fait with cycling, but what I've read is that segregated bike lanes are really the way, and you've seen it in Holland, but also what's happening in central London. I know it's different, I know our roads are different, but that really gives families and people of all generations confidence to cycle when they feel protected. And just one point, and I know I raised it in a previous meeting. I recognise the need and the good sentiment behind narrowing the roads and increasing the pavement width on Downing Street and the Borough. I would say, and again, I'm sure there's people who've got this evidence, but psychologically, because there is still the pavement there and the lip. From my experience of running to and from school in the morning, people don't often use that extended bit of pavement to walk. I do. I've got kids, but I know people with mobility issues or with those with buggies, it's hard to get down on those lips. So perhaps you might see more of a change if it was all one level. But again, really heartened by the discussions today and the ideas that were put forward, fantastic, and grateful that the council and the county council and the borough council and the town council are all looking at that.
Well, thank you very much, Emma. You made a whole series of very good points there, actually. And I have to say that I've got a lot of sympathy with what you're saying about cycling, and that when I was a boy, I always used to cycle to school. But I wouldn't be happy with my children or grandchildren cycling through central Farnham on these narrow roads, even though the traffic doesn't move very fast. That's a real problem. It goes back to Chris's point about our road system was designed for the horse and cart era, not for the motor era, and that's what we're stuck with. But you made a whole series of excellent points, and let's allow Chris or whoever to respond to them.
Thanks, Andy. Just one point, Emma. The bid that we put in, we put the bid in because there was money there. I don't think anybody would have thanked us for not putting the bid in to try and get funding from central government. We actually overbid for our 10 schemes, so there was a limit to what we could put in. Rest assured, that is just one scheme that we thought we could implement fairly quickly. We will be doing what they call an LSWIP, a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. So all of this will be included, and this will be money that we will be looking internally for ourselves, between the partners, between the LEP, and so on. So rest assured, we're not just looking at that. You are perfectly right. The new cycling guidance requires segregated. So that was one of the other things I should have mentioned on the bid. We now have to make that segregated, which obviously gives that bit more feel of safety. The difference with Holland, and just something to mention here, there is a difference with Holland. And Holland is that actually there's a hierarchy. If you have an accident, you're a pedestrian and you're hit by a bike, it's the bike's fault. If you're a cyclist and you're hit by a car, it's the cyclist's fault. In this country, it's who's to blame. So if a cyclist suddenly swerves out and it's hit by a car, it's the cyclist's fault. So there is a fundamental difference, which is why they tend to drive far better over there, because they know if they hit a cyclist or they hit a pedestrian, they're automatically deemed to be at fault. It's not the same here. I'm not saying we can't deal with that. I'm just saying that's the difference, which is why you do tend to get, and the fact, of course, it's flat, why you do tend to get a lot more cycling done in Holland.
Thanks, Chris.
Andy, can I just add a very quick point with regards to the schools? And that was that we're going to be working with all Farnham schools to look at, firstly, ensuring that every school's got bikeability, and secondly, every school's has decent access to maximise on walking and cycling. I've made a note of the schools that you've mentioned, Emma, and we'll make sure that our engagement includes these schools to try and maximise for them as well.
Thank you for Paul. I'm sure everybody will be very, very pleased to hear that, actually. It's not going to be easy for some schools, like St Andrews that was mentioned, is right in the town centre and right near the very busy roads, the very busy narrow roads. But it's good that you're looking at it. Hey, can we come now to Chris Whitehouse, please? Do you have a question or want to make a point, Chris?
Yeah. So hi everyone. So yeah, had a couple of questions. I just wanted to quickly reply to a couple of things. So obviously, like the boundary lane, single lane issue, I think has been brought up, and I think it's one of the things that I think it's probably fair to say that so long as the ultimate volume of the traffic going through stays roughly the same, sort of making it one lane might not necessarily actually solve the issue, might make things worse from a pollution perspective. Of course, I would say that hence why, Andy, your suggestion about changing the road network so that you don't get everyone routed around boundary lane is the way forward, rather than giving up on the aspiration of wider pavements more generally. But yeah, so I was wondering. So on that, I was wondering, do we actually have any data on what the pollution has been before and after, just to sort of compare? Because that'll give us an idea of what to aim for in terms of reducing traffic through there. Wanted to say that, yep, park and ride all sounds really good. Anything that can get more park and ride stuff, entirely in favor of. Get people into the town. And on the cycling stuff, yeah, I just want to second that. My flatmate doesn't drive, he cycles, and he's a very, very keen cyclist, so he's cannier than most, but even so, he's had a few close shaves with, frankly, very inconsiderate drivers. So anything that can help on that front is good. And then I guess like my final point, which is that's a question, but just sort of a point, just to remind everyone that we do exist, is that as a younger person who doesn't own their own house and rents, it can grate when people talk about housing targets imposed. We've built enough. When housing prices have tripled in my lifetime, I confess that sort of thinking strikes me as a bit mean. I think, you know, by all means, I have issues here and there, but yeah, flatly, nationally, locally, whatever, in the Southeast particularly, it's just not true. We're building enough houses.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. I'll just answer one point that the Borough Council, Waverley Borough Council, like all borough and district councils, has the responsibility to monitor and measure air pollution and air pollution hotspots. And Waverley does that, and it produces annual reports to the government on it. The problem that Waverley has is that it can't necessarily control all the issues to do with air pollution, which are mainly traffic related, of course, in Farnham at least. But Waverley does do that, and it has that responsibility. Do you want to pick up, Chris, on some of the other points, or Paul?
Can I suggest Paul wants to come in?
Of course.
And I'll come back.
Of course, Paul, you come in.
Oh, very, very quick comment, and thank you for letting me back in, Andy. Just to say, Chris, in the same boat as you, rent elsewhere in Waverley, obviously, and a lot of the issues here are, as you say, it's not that it's the types of houses that are being built, but also, and more crucially, I think, to this particular debate, is the lack of infrastructure that goes with them. And actually, that is one of the real problems that's sort of been building up over time, is that the number of houses being built without sufficient infrastructure to actually support and sustain those in the long run. And that could be things like roads and schools, and frankly, all the rest of these things that need to go with it. So I think the issue that we've got is that we shouldn't be in this position where we're having to retrospectively build infrastructure to support the housing development. But right now, that's the situation that government policy effectively puts us all in, and particularly Waverley Borough Council, and as you've seen, Waverley will throw out these things only to be overridden by an inspector. So I appreciate that it's not a particularly helpful situation, but I'm afraid that is where we are, and I personally do very much sympathise with your position.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Chris?
In terms of have we done an after measure, I don't know whether I'll land Alex in it now, whether or not as part of the OIP we've had any recent figures. The only thing I would say that might help Alex get out of this one is, of course, traffic volumes are well down. So in terms of, whilst you may feel, you know, there's congestion there, the actual anecdotal is the volumes are well down on what they were. So it's not a straight comparison, but I don't know, Alex, if we'd had anything recent.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, Chris, we are still monitoring traffic, obviously not continuously, but periodically. Air quality, as Andy's picked up, will be covered in the annual review period. So we've not commissioned any additional air quality surveys because that would overlap with the work that's already being done. But yeah, you're quite right. Traffic is down overall. The composition of that has changed somewhat. So you'll see a reduction in cars, but the number of HGVs and vans will stay the same because they're delivering goods and services. So the composition appears to have shifted. It's not as straightforward as saying there's an arbitrary cap in terms of the quantum of vehicles that then leads to a threshold point for air quality, because the composition and the behavioural characteristics of vehicles will dictate how much they contribute towards pollution. So how you drive a vehicle, whether it's caught in traffic, the weather conditions, for instance, also impact the amount of pollutants that are generated and condensed in a certain area. So there are a lot of variables, so it's not quite as straightforward as a cap, but we will be keeping an eye on it.
Okay, yeah, it's good to hear that the data shows that the traffic is going down, because yeah, that helps counteract sort of the anecdotal, oh, there's more traffic than ever, but no, if there's less traffic, all good stuff.
Thanks, Chris. Next question is Max Lyons. I happen to know that Max has got long experience in this area. Max has been involved with the team set up by Jeremy Hunt to come up with ideas to solve this problem. So if you'd like to come in, Max, now and make your points.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed, we can hear you, Max.
Right, thank you. I mean, I live in the town centre, as you know, Andy, and I designed the Lion and Lamb many years ago, which is one of the few pedestrian areas we've got. And I was chairman of the Farnham Society for many years. And I strongly support some pedestrianisation in the town centre. And how we get there is one thing, but I really strongly believe we should. Having the A287 and the A325 going through the borough is mad. And the A287 coming up Downing Street is just, you know, it's never going to be a pleasant place to shop and be while that's happening. I think once we get around the pedestrianisation, one of the most important things we've got to do is to improve the footpaths into the town centre, because from a lot of areas of the town, it is appalling. I mean, where I live in Old Park Lane, getting to the town centre, you could die crossing the road, and there's no visibility, nothing at all. So that's my thoughts. It's not a question, it's just my beliefs.
Yeah,
thank you.
It'd be nice for, thank you for that, Max. It'd be nice for Chris and Paula to respond there.
So in terms of, I'll let Paula come in a sec. In terms of pedestrian access from areas outside the core of the town, yes, that will be part and parcel. As I mentioned earlier, this LSWIP, we're great with acronyms, but this cycling and walking plan. So that is something, and you're perfectly right. I mean, I've had a question from a resident about disabilities and asking, you know, will you design it so that obviously people with disabilities will be fully catered for? The answer is yes. And then the response back was, we forget about this. Well, the footways I'm actually on now, never mind the drop crossings to allow me to cross the road, are in such a condition that I struggle. So we've got to get the whole thing right. So rest assured, that will be part and parcel of it. Paula.
Sorry, I think you covered it, Chris, to be honest. I just want to say that I agree there's a balance to be struck here. And as part of the optimised infrastructure development proposals, there will be a number of options. And I highly encourage everybody that attends the LLFs to have a look at and comment on how this lands with residents that always using the town centre. We want to listen to you, and we want to make something that would be productive and useful to the residents of Farnham. So please share as widely as possible your ideas about what you think would work and what you think might not work and why, and we will consider them all.
Can I just add something else whilst I remember on this? And it is this dichotomy. So we are looking to come up with proposals that will hopefully review how we operate, transport operates within the town, walking and cycling and so on. In doing that, we know that things are going to have to change. If we manage to achieve this, we're going to have to change things. And that will mean maybe widening footways and so on. So we have a dichotomy here that we have got schemes that we were going to do, like South Street, for example. And this was a question that was asked offline. When have we got plans for doing South Street? As you know, we've done the Borough, we've done Downing Street. Castle Street was going to be done, but that was deferred. Part of that was Folly Hill, and then it was the weather, because the material we were using was weather susceptible, temperature susceptible particularly. South Street's ready to be done as well. That was going to be done in 2021. What we are doing is looking to defer some of this. I'm not saying we're doing that with Castle Street, but certainly with South Street. So we've just got to get that balance so people can bear with us on that one, because there's no point in doing resurfacing works. The borough needed doing, don't get me wrong, there's no question about that. But there's no reason, no point in doing resurfacing works if we know in a couple of years' time we might be redigging it up again. But it is just trying to get that balance. It's not an easy one, isn't that? But if people can bear with us on that one.
Thanks, Chris. The next person to bring in is Fiona Masari. Fiona?
Yes, lovely. Thank you so much. I'm really happy that the three councils are working together, because it feels as if for the first time in the 40 years that I've lived here, there is a real chance that we might actually get something done. And I think so many of the measures sound excellent. To me, the key thing seems to be the order of events in order to give all viable alternatives to cars being sort of so predominant. So it seems as if footpaths and cycleways could happen without any other sort of restrictions, and more cycle parking. I think that's really key. Then to have, I think the 20 is plenty speed limit would, since if we actually get moving at all, then that will be something that makes the thing simpler rather than having 20 in some places and 30 in others. I think then moving on to the HGV ban and having electric van only delivery from different outlets. You know, we need to this and detrimental to business, because we've already set up these outline car parks. So the idea of having Coxbridge as an outline car park with a park and stride and electric hopper buses coming through so that we can get delivery and get people into town, I think would be excellent. And then the other one thing I wanted to mention was the idea of the northern car park. It would make such a huge difference if the traffic from the whole of the northern area in the Hale, etc., and all of those new developments didn't need to go all the way through around the town. And I know that there, you know, I had a reply to a question I asked them, that they said it's the impediment is the fact that some of the land from the castle through to the northern car park at the upper Hart one, some of it is privately owned. So I'm wondering how possible it is that we might actually get that resolved, because I think it would take such a huge amount of traffic away from town. And I think sometimes there will have to be some sacrifices made by you know, private landowners or by people for the sake that to lose a bit of garden for the sake of making these huge advantages for the town. And just so apart from the park and stride at Coxbridge, I think Farnham should be a zero emission town, and we could just have these electric buses as the main delivery, so that we can eventually get towards pedestrianisation and only have very, you know, time limited maybe times when the cars go through. So and I think if we reduce the traffic through some of these measures, there is a potential eventually for turning Central Car Park into a lovely green social event space, which would make so much of the fact that we are a craft city and that we want to be able to kind of flourish in that way. So my main questions are whether there could be sort of some common land extension so that we can then have social needs catered for, whether that's through things like Central Car Park and maybe other bits of common land that could be used for possible housing projects in the future, for a centrally located community hub. So we can then, that could be an enterprise incubator as well, where, you know, businesses, little independent businesses that we want in the centre of Farnham could incubate and try out their ideas. So I think a centrally located, very broad reaching community hub would be fantastic. So what I'd love to know about is that, and also what the stages are that the council are planning on going through in order to reach some kind of pedestrianisation in the future.
Well, thank you very much for your positive comment, Fiona, and for your own visionary ideas, and we'll let Chris and Paula comment on them.
Okay, so taking the first point, I'm a great believer in, you know, carrots and sticks go together, but I'm a great believer in carrot. I mean, this goes back to Paul's point, which I think Paul was saying. He agrees that we need to do something, but we've got to put something in place first. And yes, the answer is we do. We've got to put the opportunity in place for people to do things differently. There's no good sitting here and preaching, we've got to get out of the cars, you've got to walk, you've got to cycle. We've got to put those facilities in. Those are the first ones we've got to look at. The little hopper buses. You know, when we were prepping for this earlier today, it's been in the back of our minds anyway to say, well, shouldn't we be looking at providing some small hopper buses now? Electric buses are definitely on the cards. We put a bid in central government. We didn't get it. It was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but there was money there. Why not go for it? To convert all the buses within Farnham that come through Farnham, there's basically just one operator, and they were up for it, into electric buses. The county has just put a report through that is looking to invest in electric buses with the operators. Farnham is up there. I'm not saying it's top. I can't promise that because that's not within my gift, but what I can assure you is that when it was discussed, Farnham was always seen as one of the areas we could do, because we want Farnham, as that's an example, we want it to be an exemplar. We want it to be where people are proud, people in Farnham are proud to say, come and see Farnham, come and see what it can be like. So there is that opportunity there. In terms of the central space, that was picked up at the last meeting, the community meeting, I believe. And yeah, of course, if you can move some of the cars out of the centre, and yes, of course, we've got people with disabilities, we've got people that can't just move out of the centre, they need to park close by. So, but if we can get some of those out, that might free up one of the car parks, and that could then be reused in the way that you suggested. All of these things, they are the art of the possible.
Thanks, Chris. Next person is Pam Pownall from South Farnham, who happens to be a near neighbour of mine. So over to you, Pam. I think you're still muted at the moment. You're unmuted now, Pam, so go ahead. Oh,
muted again.
You're muted again there.
All right.
Yeah, you're okay now, Pam, go ahead.
No, I think we all appreciate that the centre of Farnham has narrow roads and there's nothing you can really do about that. And the main concern is that people walking on the pavements are, feel endangered by the cars. They're just far too narrow. So I could only see the widening of pavements as being a good solution. But that rather puts the kibosh on having cars, bicycles and pedestrians in one space. Is there no thought of creating cycle routes that are completely off-road? We have enough green areas like the lower area of the park, the Raleigh Walk, so that people can get from A to B where they need to get on their bicycles without interrupting the pedestrians. Has that been investigated?
That is being considered, Pam. I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
The town is for pedestrians to enjoy shopping, not to be looking out for bicycles or cars, really.
Yeah, indeed. Chris, over to you.
Well, do people know that the first surfaced road was put in for cyclists? So they actually surfaced, the first road that was ever surfaced was done because of cyclists. Basically, there weren't a lot of cars around, but that's what it was done for. So in terms of on-road, segregated, that's one way that we're looking, but definitely, Pam, we're looking for off-road as well, and it's just making sure that we can get width where it's safe for both cyclists and pedestrians, or just a cycle path. But normally you tend to get the two going together, but you just need that width to make sure you get the safety, because then it's pedestrians that feel vulnerable with cyclists. Cyclists feel vulnerable with cars, pedestrians feel vulnerable to cyclists and to cars. So it's just getting that balance, but definitely off-road. You have a number of super walking paths that we walked around with John earlier this year. So all of those sort of things, but it is getting that width, some of them quite narrow.
Thanks, Chris. Can I ask John if there's any points in the there's no one else with a hand up right now, any points in the Q&A box that we think are worth bringing out and discussing, John, if you've been monitoring it, or any other of the panel members?
Yeah, Andy, could I just say something about Brightwells quickly, because that's come up a few times?
Yeah, do Stephen, do.
Just very briefly, there are a number of us who have been talking to the university, and we're making an approach to Watts Gallery and others to try and get the likes of knitters, crafters, arts and craft groups to start to get the argument going for a plan B for Brightwells if the plan A commercial option doesn't come off. And there's been quite a lot of interest in this. And we've also had some conversations within Surrey about the possibility of it. So the current arrangements, as has been said, will be taken forward by Crest Nicholson. They'll try to get all those commercial units filled. in my opinion, that will be very unlikely. And if we can start to develop that more arts and crafts thought of stuff that could go in there, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of public money in that development, and the rents certainly are going to be controlled by councils. And one of the reasons those kinds of independent shops are unable to be as successful all of the time is because the rents in Farnham are very, very high. So if in Brightwells we could get some form of a plan B with rents that those kinds of organizations could afford, then perhaps you would start to get a better hub in there once it comes online. And with the cycling that's connected to it, that Chris talked about it, and the kind of vision that we're trying to get here, maybe we could create something that really turned out to work quite well, rather than just a giant concrete monolith.
Thanks for that, Stephen. I mean, as I said earlier, we don't want to make this meeting all about Brightwells, and we have to actually allow Chris Nicholson to do what they're contracted to do, which is to try and fill the shops with tenants and so on. And that's the first option, in fact. But you're absolutely right. And I know I've mentioned that we've got Tim Oliver here now, who's the leader at Surrey. And I invited both Tim and Jeremy unfortunately couldn't make it. That wasn't to talk about Brightwells at all, by the way. But as the subject's been brought up, I don't know if Tim wants to say anything at all about it. And I don't want to in any way put you in the spot, Tim. If you don't want to say anything about it, that's fine as well.
Well, thank you, Andy. I've been listening for a while, and some very interesting suggestions, which we'll pick up, at the board. Just on Brightwells, I mean, we all recognise that we need to make that development a success. It is intended to add value to the town, and to Stephen's point, I think that now requires us to look at all options. There is an active dialogue with Crest Nicholson in respect of the units, the commercial units, and that we will take forward whatever we can that is sensible. But certainly, I think there is some merit in what Stephen suggests in terms of turning that into sort of a cultural centre and looking to relocate other certainly county facilities in that development.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, things that could be considered are things like the library, for example. I'm not wanting to prejudice any decisions, but that's the sort of thing that could be considered. Christopher Butler's got his hand up again. So, Christopher, over to you.
Sorry, thank you, Andy. Sorry to be a nuisance. Come back again.
No, you're very welcome to do that.
There's been a lot of talk about the hopper buses, and I live on Castle Hill, and I see all the other buses going up and down the hill. Most of them have virtually nobody on them, and I cannot understand why double-decker buses keep going up every half hour or so, or back down again with nobody on. Wouldn't a hopper bus size or a hopper bus type be a better option? Less pollution and take up less room in the traffic queue coming down Castle Street.
That seems a very good point. Chris,
it would. The issue we have got, that's not to say it isn't a solvable issue. The issue we've got is that bus services outside of London were deregulated, so it's now down to the individual companies. We can work with them and get quality partnerships as to frequencies and changes in service schedules and so on, to try and stop the days where one company will put one bus on and another company would reschedule a bus 2 minutes in advance of theirs. And that did happen. So those are the sort of things we look at. Why is it double-decker? It's obviously a commercial issue. Sometimes they've got the double-deckers. They may have used them in the morning for school runs or something like that, and then they would prefer to use a smaller bus, but obviously they have a double-decker in the yard and they don't want to buy a smaller bus because the double-decker's then just going to be stood. So there can be all sorts of commercial reasons, but we haven't got control over that commercial side. We don't want to run, well, I don't want to speak for Tim, but I'm sure the councils don't want to run bus services in terms of the days when they physically ran them. but they do want more control over them. And unfortunately, we haven't quite got that. I mean, at the moment, COVID has hammered public transport. I mean, that buses have been really hammered. So, you know, at the moment, you will see empty buses. But I'm sure what you're talking about is stuff that was going on well before COVID.
Thanks, Chris. Chris Whitehouse next.
Hey, yeah, it's just a quick one actually. The talk about buses reminded me. Often on some roads, you have issues with stretches of on-street parking, which effectively reduces a 2-lane road to a 1-lane road. And for once, people who take public transport and people who drive, I'm sure, can be united in frustration on this sort of thing, just because it slows things down. Obviously, it's a very hard thing because, you know, people who live there do need to park their cars, but has there been any thought into, is this considered an issue in terms of slowing down, you know, traffic and particularly bus services, which discourages people from taking the bus, and what we might do about it?
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, certainly where we're aware that this affects particularly bus services, I have to say, then the authority normally does look to take action to try and improve it. But it is always that balance. You know, people need to park their cars. If they haven't got off-street parking, you have also hit the nail on the head, you know, and it will be, I think it wouldn't be fair of me not to say that actually it does also act as traffic calming. So it's just always trying to get that balance of trying to make the provision for people with cars at the same time allowing free flow, but at the same time keeping speeds down. So it's just getting that balance. But it isn't something we shy away from. We do actually actively try and deal with it. But of course, as soon as you move those cars, the traffic, as you rightly say, does speed up. And then you get the impression of safety and so on. And, you know, whether it's real or not, that's people's perception. And if they feel unsafe, you know, that's something we should look to address.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Andrew Milner next.
Yes, I just want to follow up on Chris Tunstall's asking us for patience regarding resurfacing South Street. I think the recent resurfacing has made a major improvement to safety for cyclists. If we can't get South Street resurfaced in the near future, can we repair the troughs and potholes in it?
I will. It was your question that I was subtly, or perhaps not, Andrew, trying to answer. So yes, I will ask them to look at that. We have, because of everything that else is ongoing, we have asked them to hold back on doing wholesale resurfacing at this moment in time. But there were a number of roads within Farnham that were due to be resurfaced in 2021, South Street being one of them. But I will take that point on board. We obviously, we don't want to leave them unsafe. I'm not asking people to bear with us on the basis that we leave them unsafe. That is not what I'm saying. But yes, point taken, and I'll take that away. Can I, while you're on, just take the opportunity to answer a couple of other points that you did raise. And I mean, people will be aware or will have seen these advanced stop lines for cyclists at traffic lights to give them a way through before the traffic starts to move. Those are the sort of things we will look at. I mean, although we talk about the congestion in Farnham, there are only 2 sets of lights in Farnham. It's hardly the most traffic signalled town within the country, even bearing in mind its size. But we will definitely be looking at that. So that's something that we will consider. And your other point was about parking for cyclists. I mean, most people have been, and I know the weather's an issue here, but most people have been to Europe. And in terms of what's the biggest number of vehicles on the road, particularly in town centre? Motorbikes, scooters, that sort of thing. They all have them. And they just, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but they all fly back. But you ask about parking for that. Will that be improved? And that's something we'll take on board as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Sophie Lovell now.
Hello, everybody. I have a question for Paula Goff, and it's basically, you were talking about cycling for children in the town centre, and I know this programme's all about the town centre, but you will obviously, for cycling, think about the connectivity beyond the town. Could I ask that you talk to some of the schools, particularly South Farnham School in Menin Way and St Polycarp School? I gather there's quite a keen element who would like to see cycling from the town up to the station. That I think is a great idea, because I'm sure plenty of commuters would like that facility. I'm just interested in how you would approach that idea, and that's probably from Chris Tunstall's point of view. Knowing Station Hill as it is, you have the pavement on one side with the mulberry and you have the pavement on the other side with the shops. Would you have on-road cycling or shared space? How would that work? But most of all, if you go beyond the station with the cycling route, I think it would be essential to talk to the two schools if you would expect the children to do cycling from the town. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Chris, or Paula, I think it was directed to Paula as well.
Yeah,
Paula.
Thank you, Sophia. Very good point that you've made. And what our intention is to, whilst we have been trying to engage with the schools already, we've been very conscious that they've been extremely busy dealing with COVID issues. However, we plan to get hold of every single Farnham school and understand their current take-up in walking and cycling. What are the key blockers to more walking and cycling? What are the parent view? What are the view from the children? As well as engaging the schools in some sort of activity to actually have an input into the formation of the solutions that particularly affects their town and their school. So we're going to be devising a particular survey type question and answer to try to understand all school perspectives on how we can devise a walking and cycling that is really fit for purpose and actually really practically encourages that take up. It's really important to say that the success of this program will depend on the integration of all the different modes of travel. So that is buses, that is walking and cycling, that is reducing the number of trips people make using their cars by making all other measures more user-friendly, more reliable and more attractive. And walking and cycling is a big part of that for any business case now to central government to be successful. So we're going to have a big focus on that one.
Could I come back, Andy? Is that all right?
Of course you can, Sophie, absolutely.
Just to give you a little bit of history, Paula, and I have history of two schools in Farnham, one South Farnham and the other one Waverley Abbey, which is a bit beyond. I can remember the time when the schools programme, this was a Surrey initiative for school buses.
Yeah.
It was, everyone thought it was a wonderful idea and it would work really well, but it had a very poor uptake and it became, not affordable. So it was done away with. So I think particularly it's very important that you talk to the parents and to the schools, because they can actually explain how difficult some of these projects can be.
Absolutely, and there is a piece of work that actually DFT are doing around school travel as well. They're looking at the number of cars they can take off the road at peak time by actually making it more expensive, if you like, for people to have to drive, and more reliable and user-friendly for people to use the council buses. There is a piece of research and a thought leadership going on around better school travel, which there is also in Europe and is extensively used. So we're going to look at the school bus travel as part of the solution for reducing car use as well, Sophia. But if you've got any particular thoughts with regards to the particular schools you're aware of, I'm all ears. Please feel free to share more detail.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. Paul, it's back to you, Paul Hoskins. You're muted again, Paul. You're not
Sorry,
okay
caught me
now.
out there. I was busy writing something down. I do apologise.
No problem. No problem at all.
I think the point that I wanted to make was that everybody wants it to change. I mean, the situation in Farnham, I live here, is dire. It's awful. Every day, it's a nightmare. And I think my frustration, the thing I get so frustrated about, is the amount of contradictions that come out of councillors. You know, it's constant. It's we want to stop people driving their cars or reduce car use. We want to reduce pollution. And yet I've been taking 2 or 3 screenshots every day. Come and have a look what Farnham's like with what you've done with it. You've made it 10 times worse. And really constantly saying, oh, this is COVID, this is COVID. People know it isn't. And other town councils have come to the same conclusion. It does more harm than good. And anything that you do, I should point out, I don't drive into town. I hardly ever drive into town. I'm lucky enough, I live close enough, I can just walk in. I don't need to use the car to go to town. I don't feel unsafe there. I just feel that the place is dominated by cars queuing up to go somewhere. Which brings me to the point that Chris did say this, to be fair to him, you can't do any of this unless you've got alternatives first. At the moment, you're putting the cart before the horse, and you've got to get it the other way round. Sometimes people get so involved in their profession, and that maybe that's sometimes I've done it myself. Sometimes you have a view that I've done this for years, so my view is the right view, and subconsciously you just completely ignore any alternative view. My personal view is I live here, I go in the town a lot, I walk there. You need to get those cars moving because they're there, you haven't got rid of them, you can't do anything about that for now. You need to move them, not block them. And the last thing I want to say is that it's not actually even in many of the, I don't know how many people on this call, maybe 100 or so. It isn't really us that you've got to deal with. It's the 28, 30,000 odd people that use these roads every day that aren't on this call, that will never be on this call, but you're going to really annoy them when you do this thing and you don't have alternatives in place because, well, eventually you'll be voted out, I guess, but you'll be responsible for that. Yeah. And the last thing is, I didn't rubbish 20 miles an hour. I just said, I have no feelings on it because I don't see it making any difference.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, thanks for that. I very much welcome your comments, Paul, because I say you represent a view that's probably held by quite a few people. But we did, by the way, we did canvass the whole town and we got over 800 responses. So that's a pretty good response for a town of this size. And we're not ignoring people's opinions. We're very happy to listen to your opinions, and we're not actually putting the cart before the horse either. We haven't made up our mind about what to do. You said you actually get different opinions from councillors. That's actually because councillors do have different opinions about it.
Like contradictions, not a different opinions, contradictions.
Contradictions. Well, give me an example of what you mean, Paul.
I just did. So you need to reduce car use. You need to reduce pollution. Every day, from what you've done, from narrowing the lanes, which, and you've seen with the representations, and you've talked about it as widening pavements. So please don't insult me by saying this is COVID. You've done exactly the opposite. You've increased pollution. You've increased the traffic jams because you've got no alternative for them to go at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
You contradict yourself.
That's a view, but I've lived in this town since 2002, Paul, and the traffic was banked up before any of the COVID measures were in. The traffic wasn't moving before. So the idea that you remove the COVID measures and then the traffic starts moving is contrary to the experience of the last 15 to 20 years. We have a problem that there are too many car journeys in the town. I think 34,000 was the figure. So we can debate how you deal with that. And as Andy said, your perspective is a completely legitimate one, but the people who are supporting cycling and walking and all the other things they'd like to do at the moment, and for many years now, haven't been able to do it because on Downing Street, for example, you get walloped by the wing mirrors of the cars and the trucks going past if you try. So the debate needs to continue. The points that you're making are valid, but it's not solely the COVID measures that have jammed up the town. The town's been jammed for years now.
I've lived here longer than
Andy,
you.
if I could come in, please.
If I just make a point, please. I've lived here longer than
Paul,
you, Stephen.
can you give and take?
The question is, you've got 2 lanes of traffic and you're forcing them into one. What are you suggesting that that's helped?
Yes, I am suggesting it's helped, Paul, yeah. Because we slowed down all of the traffic, it's shown what can be achieved, and it's made it safer for cyclists and pedestrians. People are actually stopping and going to the shops. I'm amazed, but I think for the first time ever, Stephen, Spence and I, despite being a bit almost opposite political opinions on so many things, are in complete agreement on this. There are so many views, but there's lots of people who just see Farnham as too dangerous to be in as a cyclist or as a pedestrian. We've got to get the through traffic out, and much of the traffic that's coming in to visit out of the town centre to make it return to the lovely historic market town that it should be, and indeed can well be going forward. Andy, if you can put up with me for a second.
Yeah, carry on.
Buses and double-decker buses that are full at off-peak times, travelling around the outer fringes of Farnham. I once took that question to a manager of a bus company, and he said, "Look, what do I do? I can't afford 2 sets of buses. A set of double-decker buses that do all the routes when all the routes are busy, and a set of hopper buses that do all the routes when things are quiet. The extra cost of driving a double-decker on those routes is tiny compared to buying an extra set of buses to do it at off-peak times. That's the real reason. And indeed, if it was double-decker, it would have been an empty hopper going on the same journey."
Thanks, Wyatt. We'll be running out of time soon, so if we can ask Sophie to come back in now and try and make your points fairly quickly this time, Sophie.
I will. Chris didn't get a chance to answer my question about it.
I'm sorry, Sophie. Chris, can you answer Sophie's question? Yeah.
You know me, Sophia, I'm never one to be shy, and I was itching to get back in. So you asked about Station Hill and Waverley Lane. The scheme that was put to DFT, that really we would have loved to have consulted on it, but the timescale just wasn't there. The good news is that we will consult on it. We will be coming and talking. As it currently stands, it stops at Broomleaf because that's where the cycle route then goes off. So it does affect Station Hill up to Waverley Lane with the junction of Broomleaf. The slight bad news is that the government have also said they want it segregated. Now, that's good news in one way, in a safety way. It's bad news in that you end up taking a bit more space out. We will be consulting. So although we put that scheme in, that does not mean to say that that scheme's going to be put in either in its entirety or changes to part of it. We will be talking.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Fiona, would you like to come back in now?
Yeah, thank you. Just very briefly, the one thing that we didn't, I didn't sort of hear anything about, I'm sorry if I missed the earlier part and you've mentioned this, but the idea of that northern car park link, I've understood that it's tricky because of the fact that there is some private land. However, it is a very small area to punch through, as it were, from opposite the castle to Upper Hart car park and behind the Art College. And it just seems to me that when we're talking about reducing traffic in the centre of Farnham, and we've got 4 different directions, and everything from the north has to go all the way around the town, it means a quarter of our traffic is coming, and could be prevented. And I'm just wondering how many, landowners, and whether it's actually their houses or whether it's just a particular bit of land. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of what the impediments are, because it seems to me that Northern Car Park, as well as the Coxbridge Car Park and Stride, could make a massive difference, along with the,
If I could say, Fiona, before Chris answers, it's obviously a sensitive issue when you're concerned with people's private houses and gardens and things. But it is being considered, it has been looked at, and it'll be looked at appropriately. We've got to be careful you know, in what we say and do. But it would be a terrific improvement if we could actually connect either just to the Upper Hart car park or all the way down to the Heart. And then you could make the bottom of Castle Street a market area. So there's potential for big improvements, but it's a sensitive subject. So back to Chris to comment on it.
Thank you.
Oh, on the sensitive bit. So yeah, it is something that, as Andy says, that we are actively looking at. So when the OIP comes out, I can't say, I honestly can't say, because it's in its process now. Probably within the next week will be, well, just before Christmas, we'll be in a better position, but then it's going to the board on the 22nd of January. So if it is in there and there's a lot of benefit, I fully accept that, then the fact that it's private land, most roads cut across private land, so there are mechanisms there that people are duly compensated if that's the case. And we'd always look to negotiate, to try and get an agreement with the landowners as much as possible. And the ultimate is, at the end of the day, and it's used nationally, is you can go for things like compulsory purchase orders. That's the ultimate. We wouldn't want to do that. We want to do it by negotiating, because as Andy said, it's all right saying that. I've said this to other people before. Resolving the problems normally impacts on individuals, whether it's individuals that use the network and have to do something slightly different, or it's individuals that live adjacent to something that you're going to change and it affects them. So it's always got to be treated with really sensitively. But it isn't something that's impossible, not by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Chris. We did start a few minutes late because of technical problems. I don't mind running over just by a few minutes, but I don't want to take on, you know, imposing people's evening too much. So we'll just very quickly ask 3 more people to make their points quickly, and I won't take any more after that. So starting with Chris Shepherd, then Nigel, and then Tom Lancaster. So Chris, first of all, please.
Good evening. I hope you can hear me. Just listening to people's comments, I'd just like to offer a personal perspective of the way I felt of it, and particularly to think what a brilliant idea this is to get this going, and let's hope it works. I've lived here 70 years now, and frankly, with the coming of the coronavirus and the narrowing down of the lanes and the safe social distancing, personally, as a shopper walking into the town, I find the town more inviting to shop in than I've ever known it before. The cars stopped in the queues are courteous. They let you cross the road. There's a different feeling and atmosphere in the town. And if we can achieve that in the long run, I think that's the thing to go for. And I'd really like to see a proper consensus of opinion of what people think of the social distancing measures that have been introduced, because I think they really are a benefit to the town. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Chris. You actually reminded me of a point I did want to make. So I looked at what was happening on Saturday, and I was struck by how courteous the drivers were coming in from East Street and, sorry, from West Street and Down Street coming together. We have widened it to 2 lanes, but people have to cross over sometimes, and the drivers are being extremely courteous. And also the drivers coming out of Castle Street were being allowed out by the people in the borough. Almost every car allowed one out before it progressed. And it was a credit to Farnham how courteous people are. And it's a general experience of mine in Farnham that people are very courteous, and people have been very courteous in this series of LLFs as well. So Nigel, would you like to make your point now?
Thank you. Good evening. I mean, I've listened to Paul Hoskins' Council of Despair, which you've suggested will be shared by a lot of people in Farnham, and I think that's right. And I would just like to urge the council to be bold in this. I mean, if you go to places like Holland, you can see how backward England is, really, or Britain is as in its transport policy and ideas. And Farnham is always been a rather backward town in England, disregarding all that, because so many other towns have managed to make some kind of progress with cycling and particularly pedestrianisations of town centres. A lot of people are going to be very reluctant to be prized out of their cars. You know, they'll want to drive their tank-sized 4x4s into town much the same as ever. As I think you are aware now, that really has got to change. So rather than risk kind of doing just a little bit here and there and not making any great improvements, I would urge you to be bold. And I'm encouraged by what I've heard this evening.
Well, thank you for that. Now, I don't think we need to respond to that. It's very, very well said. Now, sorry, it's Tom Lancaster now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Tom.
Good. Okay, full disclosure, I'm trying to support the council with giving sort of advice about the local cycle and walking infrastructure. I'm with Farnham Cycle Campaign, just generally interested in any sort of active travel. We've always kind of felt that people don't cycle because, you know, they're put off by the congestion, the danger, maybe pollution. And that was always just sort of like a gut feel. But recently we got hold of the Department for Transport's modelling tool. It's called the Propensity for Cycling tool. So we looked at it, and it specifically uses evidence-based modelling of what happens if you remove those constraints and you do Dutch style or even Cambridge type style, because we do have this stuff in the UK, facilities and infrastructure for cycling and walking. And we were seeing that cycling in Farnham for commuting was suppressed by about 90%. 90%. So people making journeys, this isn't cyclists, this is cycling, everybody feeling the freedom to be able to cycle. And most people weren't doing it because they were being put off by, well, what we know is Farnham and especially the town centre. And for schools, that's the other scenario they do. You're looking at going from 5% of kids, but their want to do it, to have that independence, is actually up to levels of 50%, particularly at our secondary schools. And that's kind of what we're campaigning for. It's to give an alternative. So if the roads do get clogged up, the lifeblood of the town, there is an alternative that people can choose or not choose as they like. But it's really getting that choice back, and also having that secondary network that allows, you know, the vitality, the retail to continue. And sorry, that wasn't really a question. That was just kind of saying where we were coming from.
No, that's fine, Tom. Thank you very much. I think we have to end the Q&A here, but and on the agenda we had John down to close the meeting, and we'll still do that. But I think as a courtesy, I really should ask Tim if he'd like to say anything. Tim was very busy this evening, but he actually managed to make time to make the latter half of the meeting. And I would have liked Jeremy to be here as well, but Jeremy just couldn't make it at all because of his parliamentary duties. But as Tim turned up, and as he's chairman of the and also chairman of the board, I think of a courtesy we should give him the opportunity to say what he thinks from what he's heard. Is that okay, Tim?
Yeah, Andy, thank you very much, and thank you for that opportunity. I mean, this is a challenging project. I mean, everybody agrees that what we should be bold, and we are going to be bold, and we want to do whatever we can to improve the congestion and the pollution in Farnham. The challenge is to find a single solution that everybody is happy with, and I don't think realistically that is going to be the case. So there is the competing interests of drivers, of pedestrians, of cyclists, and so on. But there are things we can do, and I would hope that certainly from the work that has gone into creating the vision statement, which has been widely shared and widely responded to, I think we are beginning to see a reasonable consensus in terms of what people want from this project. I would just add a little bit to what Chris said about the buses. We are in dialogue with all of the bus operators, and there are about something like in the region of 20 of them, different 20 organisations across the county, absolutely with the intention of looking at putting the right size of vehicle on the road. There will be a trial, a pilot of a kind of effectively a hopper bus type arrangement where you can access it at the end of your road. It'll be in real time and so on. So that, you know, I am very keen indeed that we do invest in buses. We're putting 50 million into the low emission carbon neutral buses and so on. So you know, and I think somebody made this point that actually it's chicken and egg. Actually, to get the drivers off the road, you've got to provide them with some alternative, sensible means of transport. And you know, buses is part of that solution. Obviously, at the moment in COVID, that's not particularly welcome for some people. So all I would ask is for your kind of tolerance as we work through these difficult issues. You know, it is excellent news that the Surrey County Council, Waverley Borough Council, and Farnham Town Council are united in looking for long-term solutions here. You know, that I know that everybody would like to see this done tomorrow. I would, but you know, we need to work through that. We need to use the evidence base to support the proposals you know, that we're pursuing. Chris Tunstall, I think, is doing an excellent job in bringing together that evidence base. You know, and you know, we will get there. We will get there. This is, you know, as somebody has said, and as Stephen regularly reminds me, it's 50 years. You know, that this has been an issue in Farnham. You know, it won't be an issue in 50 years' time. But you know, we're living in a dynamic world, a changing world. Nobody would have predicted what's happened in terms of the pandemic. You know, and therefore rushing to a solution is probably not in anybody's best interest. But that doesn't in any way suggest that we're not going to move this forward as quickly and as sensibly as we can.
Thanks very much for that, Tim. Before I close the meeting and before I ask John to close the meeting, I'd just like to thank everybody who turned up for the meeting. It was a very useful set of contributions we've had, and obviously particularly thank Chris and Paula for their work in making the presentation, answering questions. I'd also like to thank Ian Lynch, who does and the Town Council, who do terrific work behind the scenes in organising the thing and in hosting the meeting, and making sure we get an audience and making sure the slides are correct and so on and so forth. So a whole number of people. And we did have a technical hitch at the start, but we're learning about these meetings, and you get that, I'm afraid. You just have to live with that. So that's all I wanted to say. And if Ian can, at the end, put up the slide of the future LLFs, just so people can see that. I'll now pass over to my colleague John, the joint chair of the LLF, to close the meeting. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Andy. And in closing the meeting, I can really only just echo what Tim Oliver and Andy have just said there. As Nigel Ling said, it is a bold project, this, and we are being bold, and we don't underestimate, you know, the challenges that we've got here. I would just sort of say, you know, to try and reassure everybody, a number of things that we're really trying to do all at once if we can. We really want to improve the town centre as a place to go, a place to visit and draw people into it, especially our own community. So we are thinking about, you know, how we make it a community centre and not just a shopping centre. We want both of those aspects to thrive. So that's important. Obviously, we want to remove the cars where we can, if possible. But we also want, of course, to make sure that when we do that, we provide other means of, travel in their place. And that's got to be done up front. So that's why this whole bus conversation is so important, and that we, you know, take steps in that area, if it's practical, before we start, you know, making other constrictions. So that's all important. And of course, we also want to make sure that, we continue to make access to the town centre by, whatever means people want to come. You know, if they still want to come by car, well, we'll find a car park for them somewhere or other. If they want to come on a bus, we'll try and make that better. And of course, we want to make more provision for cyclists and pedestrians. So we're going to try and do all those things. And at the same time, we've got to tackle the problem that all this brings, which is how do we move the traffic around the town? So that last question is what will be coming up in the next session. These sessions are now on the screen for you. One in red is today. And the next three are going to be talking about the outer, as we call them, major road issues, which are also very important. And they have to link in with what we're trying to do in the town centre. So I would just wrap up now by saying thank you everybody for coming along and for all your constructive inputs and for, you know, putting them over in the way that you have. And so thank you for that. And we look forward to seeing you again at the other sessions if you're interested in coming with us. Thank you and good night to everybody.
Good night.